Too early for us, too early.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Finance and Audit Committee meeting to order. Our clerk this morning, I believe, is Karen Robertson. In light of the agenda, I'd ask for a procedural motion to proceed in camera. Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Perino. All those in favour? Any opposed? None. Motion carried. Like the weirding way to that really sucks. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April 17th Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk this morning will be Ms. Karen Robertson. Today's Finance and Audit Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. Question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. No one is joining us this morning electronically that I'm aware of, Ms. Robertson. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, and we do have one. Please.
Thank you, Worship. We just have the PowerPoint presentation that would accompany KPMG's summary of audit findings under item 8A.
Thank you very much. Motion for adoption of the agenda is amended. Moved Councillor Perino, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favour? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Perino. All those in favour? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. The next item is presentations, and it is the City of Nanaimo Canadian Award for Financial Reporting for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2022. Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you. So the Government Finance Officers Association of the U.S. and Canada established the Canadian Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting program to encourage and assist local governments to go beyond the minimum requirements of generally accepted accounting principles to prepare annual financial reports. And that these reports evidence the spirit of transparency and full disclosure. And then the association helped to recognize individual governments who met this goal. So the city first received the Canadian Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting for its 2020 annual municipal report, and has received it for both 2021 and now 2022. So the annual report is a collaboration, a collaborative effort between the Finance Department and the Communications Department. And staff have put an immense amount of effort into creating the report, and I'm happy to celebrate their hard work today.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to you, the whole team, everyone involved. This is a pretty marvelous thing, and I must say, I assume somebody's got a camera handy, because we have a rather magnificent and hefty bit of hardware here for presentation, including a temporary 2022 sticker on this lovely award. So I'm going to suggest, actually, can we get the whole team that's here down for the picture? Is that, you know, it's nice to be recognized. And
Good job, guys. Don't drop it. Yeah, I know. This is what would happen.
Thank you, everyone. It's a good way to start the meeting. We have no delegations, reports, the 2023 annual financial statements. Again, Ms. Mercer, please.
So thank you. So as you know, per legislation in the community charter, financial statements must be approved by council and submitted to the province before May 15th. So in accordance with this section, we're here to present the 2023 financial statements and request that council accept them. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bates-Emer from KPMG to take you through the 2023 audit findings report. And then Mr. Bailey will go through some highlights of the financial statements. So
Thank you very much, Ms. Bates-Emer. Good morning, Ms. Burden, everyone. Thank you for coming. I was going to suggest you can raise that a little bit so the mic will come closer to your mouth. As my granny, who was 5 feet tall, used to say, height is a great advantage.
How's that?
You can, no,
You can raise the desk.
The whole.
Oh, I guess that's as high as it goes.
yeah.
We have reached our limit, apparently.
I played basketball at least, okay, so had to do something with this height. So good morning, everyone. Sarah and I are here today just to present the highlights of our audit findings. So to start out with the status of the audit at this stage, we are substantially complete. We received all of the information we needed to perform our audit in an efficient manner, which you'll see from our findings. You know, a very clean audit was the result of all of this. The last few steps involved in the audit is having the discussions today with the Finance and Audit Committee. And then once council accepts the financial statements, which we anticipate happening next week on Monday night, we are in a position to sign our audit opinion. We'll at that point collect the management rep letter and confirm that nothing has happened between today and Monday that would require disclosure in the financial statements, and then we'll sign our opinion. Our draft audit opinion is included in the draft financial statements, and you'll see that it is a clean audit opinion, that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects in accordance with the public sector accounting standards. We will also confirm at the early stages of the audit, and then I'll confirm again today that we are independent in our work as your auditors. In terms of any risks that were addressed in this audit, so when we presented the plan, we had told you about the one risk that we had identified in preparing for this audit, which is the risk of fraud due to management override of controls, which is required by professional standards to be identified in all audits that we perform. We perform the required procedures to address that risk with no issues. So the types of procedures we do to address this risk are testing of journal entries, specifically anything that was booked at the end to make things look a certain way, or to any accounts where we think there could be things moved around. So we have to guess at where you might try to book a journal entry fraudulently and then look there. And so obviously there was nothing that we found in addressing this. Our audit findings, our full audit findings report speaks to the areas of audit focus and our findings, our procedures and findings on each of those kind of captions there. I will just note that in the work around cash, investments, and debt, there was a new accounting standard applicable for this year related to recording and disclosing financial instruments, which has been appropriately adopted by the city in these financial statements. The adoption of this standard didn't require or didn't result in any changes to the values that you record for your investments. Your investments are all held at cost, and they still are. They were previously, and they still are recorded at cost under the new standard. The new standard did result in several new disclosures related to financial instruments, mainly around risks related to financial instruments. And then the last item up there, asset retirement obligations. So we did do quite a few procedures around the adoption of the asset retirement obligations standard. We performed this in the fall, so actually prior to doing our main audit. There was no issues with the work that management did to come up with the obligation that is now recorded in your financial statements. And that standard has been appropriately adopted, and all of the required disclosures are in your financial statements. Throughout our work, we did note a couple of differences. So when I present you the plan, I let you know what our materiality is, and then the posting threshold for differences that we're going to bring back to you. So these were things that we found in our work that were over our posting threshold. There was one difference just in the disclosures for debt in the long-term debt note, which was fixed. And then there was a couple of items related to capital assets in the 2022 figures that should have been fixed last year, but were fixed in 2023. So we just note that the comparative figures could have had those fixes in them. But we don't change comparative figures for immaterial differences. I can report that there were no significant deficiencies in internal controls noted throughout our audit, nor were there any kind of minor control deficiencies to bring to your attention. I will note for you that upcoming for next year, there are 3 new public sector accounting standards for the city to adopt: revenue, public-private partnerships, and purchased intangibles. We don't anticipate any of these having a significant impact on your financial reporting, although a little bit of work will need to be done to ensure that you have appropriately adopted them next year. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perino, please.
Thank you. You did state it. You were very clear, and I do appreciate it. But just as part of our due diligence, I'd just ask one more time if there was anything that you saw that was a concern as far as money come in, going out, staffing, anything that was a highlight for you.
No red flags identified
Right.
by us. Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kesselbrock.
I just have a question for staff or thing. I just back to the non-financial assets, so land and buildings that we own. I'm just curious, like the cost of all that we own. On here it says $862 million. Is the price that's given to that just sort of like what we paid for in the past? Like, it doesn't include inflation or anything like that. I'm just thinking like a new hospital tower is $2 billion. And you think about all the buildings that we own and land, 800 million does not seem to reflect the actual cost of what that is. And so I'm just curious in the reporting. I mean, I'm sure it's an accounting thing, but just maybe explain that a little bit.
Will you take this? Dan?
Through the chair to Councillor Kesselbrock. Check.
Better.
So you're correct, it's historic costs. So it's what the city, so buildings, for example, the costs historically that we purchased the building at, less accumulated depreciation over time, is what you're seeing as the net book value of the capital asset. So you're 100% correct. Like if you looked at like the fire station, for example, that we just put into service, is a massive component because the cost of that today, it was added to our asset register recently. It's a lot higher than some of our historic buildings that were significantly less cost, if that answers your question.
Great. Yeah, no, I think it's really a stark example of like wrapping our heads around what the degree of inflation on building is comparatively to what the historic costs were. It's like $800 million for all our assets, and then a new hospital tower, $2 billion. It's just like, whoa. And it's, I think, taken a lot for people to get used to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you very much to your team as always, and appreciate what amounts to a clean bill of health for the City of Nanaimo and the Finance Department. Ms. Mercer and team were pleased, I'm sure, as always. There is a recommended motion. Moved, Council. Sorry, go ahead.
If I can, Your Worship, I just wanted to give just a brief overview of the statements.
Okay.
Now that KPMG have completed the 2023 year-end audit and have presented the findings report to you today, staff are asking that the committee accept the statements. The audited 2023 statements need to be submitted to the Inspector of Municipalities by May 15th. The total 2023 operational surplus was $9.6 million. This can be broken down to $8.7 million general, 520,000 sewer, and 395 in water. The operating surplus was allocated to reserves as per the staff recommendation approved at the February 21st Finance and Audit Committee meeting previously. At the end of 2023, funds held in operating reserves totaled just over $90 million. BCC's $63 million, and funds held in statutory reserves totaled just over $104 million. Most of the $258 million of funds held in reserves are set aside to be used towards capital or operating projects in the 2024 to 2028 financial plan, with the exception of the financial stability reserves that we have in place. The city has $38.2 million of outstanding debt at the end of 2023, and the city borrowed just under $1.3 million through the MFA equipment loan program for 3 sanitation trucks in 2023. The net book value of the city's tangible capital assets is $857 million, as we just discussed, and $77 million of capital assets were acquired in 2023. So staff are looking for the committee to approve the 2023 financial statements as outlined in the report. We're happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Not seeing any other questions. The recommendation is moved by Councillor Hemmons, seconded by Councillor Gesselbrock. Any discussion? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Appreciate the attendance this morning. Thank you for the assistance with the presentation of the award. The next is item B, which is the British Columbia Social Procurement Initiative 2024 Annual Review. Again, Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the committee may recall that the BC Social Procurement Initiative, or BCSPI, you'll get a lot of acronyms with this one, asked the city to sign a letter of support in asking for grant money from the province to help fund the organization. So unfortunately, BCSPI was unsuccessful in securing any new grant funding. And in deciding to continue the initiative, they have transitioned to a fee-for-service model, and the annual membership fees have increased by approximately 20%. So the 2024 fee for the City of Nanaimo is estimated at about $13,000. And while BCSPI does provide support and training opportunities to the city, it does not provide additional benefits reflective of the higher cost when compared to the Canadian Collaboration of Sustainable Procurement. And that's another organization that the city has a membership in that we actually track our progress with regards to our policy. So as council was involved in deciding to participate in the BCSPI, staff felt that that you should be involved as well in deciding if we continue that membership. So Ms. Russian is here to answer any specific questions you have about this membership.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rushton. Good morning. Questions on this? Councillor Perino, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I'm trying to find a better way of asking, do you feel we truly need this? It's not a huge amount of money, but $13,000 is $13,000, you know, so.
Ms. Rushton, please.
Through the chair to Councillor Perino, this is why we're here.
I knew you'd say that.
And it's a value for money proposition in front of you. The city does get some value. It's just a question of whether or not the full value is being recognized. Again, only procurement staff take advantage of that, and we haven't onboarded new procurement staff for quite some time. So it's a question that we put to you, whether or not we should continue.
If I may, just a further question. So if we were to let it go this year, could we join back on, or is there a massive initiation fee that to come back on, say, in 5 years, should that come up? Okay, thank you.
I think that was a no.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thanks, Mayor, through you. Just a question. How much do other members of the BC SBI, say smaller municipalities, benefit from Nanaimo participating? Or is it, yeah?
I can't speak for other members. Again, their participation is up to them as to much as what they leverage from that organization. Again, they will still get the benefits of everything that Bisocial Canada now presents to them. They may gain additional information based on the successes that we've had, but we could still connect through other means as well without paying the additional funds.
Right. I guess that's my question. Is just like, is this providing a peer network that is benefiting by being part of it, or is there, we can pass on our learnings through other mechanisms just as easily with participating in this or not?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrock, yes, absolutely. Other members might gain benefit from us remaining as part of the group. It's hard to say though.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And I guess the last question I have is just the other organization that we're part of. Do they provide the training and sort of like a dialogue around best practice? I guess we would like, do we participate annually like in a gathering of some sort where there is dialogue on best practice and sort of review? Does the other organization provide that service to the same degree, if not better, than the BCSBI?
Yes, and it's hard to say because now we would be just transitioning to Bisocial Canada, so I can't compare apples to apples. But the Canadian Collaboration for Sustainable Procurement offers multiple sessions throughout the year, from being part of a working group to develop tools for the members, and peer sessions that talk about best practice and successes that other organizations have had.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to be clear, the staff recommendation on the report in front of me is, if I'm reading it correctly, to ask you to bring us a future report recommending whether or not to maintain our membership in this organization. Am I reading that wrongly, or are we making a determination today?
It's changed slightly, Councillor Thorpe.
Did I miss something?
No, the agenda is different from the report, and so the recommended motions are option 1, that council direct staff to renew the city's membership, or alternatively not renew the city's membership with the British Columbia Social
Okay, thanks very much.
I missed that too.
Thank you, I appreciate that. All right, if that's the case, then I'll speak against renewal. I feel we're already and I support the concept of sustainable procurement, of course, but I feel we're already getting the benefit of the Canadian Association. The increase in fees for this coastal communities group up to $13,000, I just feel is a bit redundant to our needs and not really a good, in my opinion, a good use of our financial resources. I would also add that I believe, if my memory is correct, that the Regional District of Nanaimo recently decided also to terminate their membership in this organization for similar reasons. So I feel we're already getting the benefit of the Canadian group. I feel our staff is on top of these initiatives, and I don't see the need to continue our membership in this. Thank you.
Would you care to move the motion to not renew then?
I will make a motion to not renew if that's appropriate.
Thank you very much. Seconded, Councillor Perino. Discussion on this? Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thanks. Yeah, no, I support the motion. At the regional district, I debated red in the face to stay into it, and I think there's been sort of enough feedback that it might not be, giving back as much as it could be. And although, like, I really do want to support the growth of understanding and knowledge within social procurement and maintaining that peer network, I'm not sure if the BCSPI and sort of in the new form is going to be as effective and supportive of that. And so I think, try out not being part of it, and then we can always reevaluate it. So I appreciate staff bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Ms. Rushton and staff for this morning. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. The next is an update of reserve policy. Again, Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you. So back on April 8th, Council adopted the new online accommodation platform reserve fund bylaw and the Housing Legacy Reserve Fund Establishment Amendment bylaw. So as a result, the reserve policy needed to be updated to include those changes and additions, and staff are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Ms. Fuller for the report, by the way. Very thorough as always. Questions for staff on this? Yes. Councillor Manley, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a quick question about the general financial stability reserve, about how much is in there, and I understand there's a newer reserve that was established during the pandemic, I think, and I'm curious about its ongoing need and whether we can use that reserve for projects.
Ms. Mercer.
So I'll start and Ms. Fulla will probably finish. The General Financial Stability Reserve, it's in equivalency, it's a rainy day fund. So in the event of, say, a natural disaster or whatnot, the city has those funds to draw on in case we need it. So it is an emergency fund to that. That's really, and there's one in general, there's one in sewer, and there's one in the water fund. So each one, we have funds we can draw on. And best practice is, I believe, 45 to 60 days worth of operating costs, and that's what the balance in that reserve reflects. And I'll ask Ms. Fulla to elaborate a bit more on that.
Okay.
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Manley. This reserve was actually created when we brought in our reserve policy. And as Ms. Mercer said, GFOA best practice is to have 45 to 90 days of annual operating expenditures on hand. So in case we have some sort of event in the city that requires us to draw on funds, or something happens so that we don't receive the revenues we're anticipating. And right now, at our minimum balance requirement is $17 million. Our closing balance at the end of 2024 will be just slightly over $17 million, and that gives us 49 days. So we're right in between the 45 and 90 GFOA best practice. We're just 4 days over that. So a little wiggle room, but not a whole lot of wiggle room there. So it really is a rainy day fund for if something comes up in the city, so we have the ability to respond quickly.
Great. So it's for catastrophic kind of events like an earthquake or wildfires or whatever.
Yeah, or you could even have a major taxpayer that doesn't pay, and we're counting on that city revenue to fund operations, and now we need those funds. We have the ability to draw from that reserve.
Okay.
Because of course we can't operate a deficit either.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Not seeing any. Someone care to make the recommended motion? Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Thorpe. Discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? And any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is the Community Resiliency Investment Program Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports Program. Good morning. We're in your hands.
Hi, good morning. Through the chair, purpose of my attending on Chief Doyle's behalf is to gain council support in applying for a grant under the Community Resilience Investment Program for fire smart activities in the city of Nanaimo for 2024. Our recommendation that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend council endorse an application to the Community Resilience Investment Program, and if successful, the 2024 to 2028 financial plan may be amended to include this grant.
Thank you. Doesn't strike me as very controversial, but never know. Anyone care to? Councillor Hemmons?
I'll make the recommended motion.
Thank you very much. Seconded Councillor Thorpe.
May I?
Yes, you may, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, the Community Fire Smart events, Long Lake Heights, Cottle Hill, Protection Island, what do those look like?
They're all distinctively different. Protection Island is more to deal with a lot of the invasive species, so it's about gathering the invasive species and removing it off the Protection Island. So there's some added cost to that because of barging and renting of bins. Right. Long Lake Heights is more of a community event for awareness with a small cost associated to removing invasive species off there because we don't have to barge. And Cottle Hill is, again, just more of awareness, community events.
And we remove the invasive species because it's fuel, correct?
Correct. It's highly volatile and it shouldn't be there. And in a wildfire situation, it's very, very flammable.
Right. Thank you. One other question. I'm curious about the interface along at the back of Cinnabar Valley that goes into extension, and we have homes that are right up against forested areas. Would a fire smart activity, could we use a fire smart activity to provide, if residents want to clear, say, 50 feet away from their lot line, that we would chip and remove that? Like, is there any funding in this envelope that would allow those communities that are on the outskirts to do clearing of their land and be supported by the city to do so?
Specifically with this grant of the $65,000, other than the community awareness piece, there's not. But if we were organized in that area, then next year we would apply for the removal of the species that's invasive up there.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Councillor Prino.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a question through you. So my understanding is this allows staff then to apply for the contribution of $65,000 from the UBCM for this. If we don't get it?
If we don't get the funds, we don't pursue those activities that we've asked for. And of the $65,000, a portion of that is for the building of a structural protection unit. Okay. So that's an added piece to the inventory of the fire service to build capacity, so we just wouldn't purchase that equipment.
Okay. Do we feel that we have a good chance of getting this grant?
I believe so, we do. We've followed the same processes that we have in the past, and we've always been successful.
Good, good, thank you.
Thank you very much. If no further questions, all those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. We're on to the non-market housing permissive exemption policy options. Ms. Slater is going to present, Ms. Mercer?
Yes. So back in September, Council asked staff to review the PTE options related to housing and bring forward recommendations to Council. So Ms. Slater and Ms. Biggin, I think, will be joining us, are here today to walk you through what our research found and the resulting recommendations.
Ms. Biggin?
Perfect timing.
I was going to say you're as timely as can be.
Sorry. Well, it's perfect time. Nothing like a little stress right before a presentation. So good morning, Your Worship and Council. We have a brief PowerPoint presentation for you. And as you will remember, back in September 2023, we had a number of permissive tax exemption, or PTE, I'll probably use that term just to shorten it a little bit today, tax exemption applications from nonprofit organizations that were operating non-market housing. So at that point in time, the city's current grants policy and guidelines document didn't really have any specific provisions to really deal with these types of properties, and we didn't have any policy criteria to evaluate the applications against. So as a result of that, there was a recommendation for staff to review permissive tax exemption options and bring forward recommendations to council, which may include a proposed update to the existing policy document and other policy recommendations. So that is exactly what we're here to do today. Kasia and I are going to give you a summary of what we found through our research, a summary of proposed policy recommendations as it relates to permissive tax exemptions for non-market housing. So throughout this process, we have learned that non-market housing can be a very complex topic. And so with that, I will let Kasia speak to the various types of housing.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Do you have the clicker? Thank you. Thank you, Jamie.
Oh, I just did it. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Okay. So for this project, we defined non-market housing as a range of housing options where the cost of housing is lower than the average cost of market housing due to some level of subsidization, which you can see in the gray box there. Non-market housing includes temporary housing, supportive housing, and social housing. And these categories were informed by our 2023 Housing Needs Report. So in terms of how each is defined, for temporary housing is a temporary beds offering emergency and support services for people who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, people having physical, psychological, or sexual abuse relationships, or people in immediate post-acute phases of recovery from drug and alcohol dependency or addiction. Stays are temporary, ranging from one night to longer depending on each individual's needs. And examples of temporary housing include permanent year-round shelter beds, transition houses, but excludes warming centers, rooming houses, and halfway houses. The definition of supportive housing is permanent housing that is subsidized to be lower than the average cost of market housing and has on-site supports for people to transition out of homelessness. And then lastly, social housing is very similar. It's defined as permanent housing again, that is some level of spectrum of subsidization, but where individuals and families live independently with no on-site supports. So an inventory of the City of Nanaimo's existing non-market housing was initiated to estimate a baseline of non-market housing units currently available in Nanaimo. The data was provided by non-market housing providers and placed into 3 non-market housing categories as shown on the screen. The inventory identified approximately 259 temporary housing beds, approximately 338 supportive housing units, and approximately 1,452 social housing units. The majority of these parcels are owned by government agencies. It's also important to note that the numbers are approximate as we were unable to get information from all non-market housing providers. Further, the definition of non-market housing varies from government agency to government agency, as well as from non-market housing providers. However, the purpose of this estimate is to gain a general sense of how many existing providers could potentially be eligible for a PTE. On to you, Jamie.
Thank you. So one of the first things that we did was a jurisdictional review. So as part of our review process, we wanted to see what other municipalities in BC were doing with regard to this topic. In particular, we wanted to look at municipalities that were comparable either by size or by population, so say communities like Kelowna or Prince George. And we also wanted to look at communities that were comparable by geographic region, so other Vancouver Island communities, say Victoria or Saanich. We also talked with BC Assessment to see if they had knowledge of any municipalities that already had addressed non-market housing specifics in their policies. After reading a lot of policies, requesting a lot of policies, and doing this research, the one consistent theme was that there were very few municipalities that had specific wording or provisions related to non-market housing. There's one municipality that has recently adopted a policy that would allow for tax exemptions for all types of non-market housing for a 5-year term, and that policy will be brought back to council for reevaluation after the 5-year term is done. While a 5-year term does sound appealing, staff would caution that permissive tax exemptions, when granted, are very difficult to end after they have been granted for any period of time, so that could be a future consideration for council. In summary, there's not a lot of precedent to follow when it comes to these types of permissive tax exemptions, and the City of Nanaimo is free to look at the advantages and disadvantages of providing these exemptions specific to Nanaimo to make an informed decision. So that was the work that was completed on the jurisdictional review, but there was also consultation done with the existing non-market housing providers. So staff, meaning myself and Kasha, we met with 12 different organizations that are currently providing non-market housing in Nanaimo. And at these meetings, we were able to get valuable input, valuable feedback, and different viewpoints on permissive tax exemptions. Of course, any non-market housing providers would fully support permissive tax exemptions because it will lower their operating costs. However, we did have some really good discussions around BC housing and operating agreements, and there are some agreements that do provide for municipal property taxes in those agreements. So there are some entities that are receiving operating funding to assist with the cost of property taxes. And of course, every housing agreement and every operating agreement is different. So one of the biggest takeaways from these meetings was that properties that are already on the permissive tax exemption list or bylaw should be maintained, as many of these properties have older agreements, or they might not have agreements at all that would assist with the cost of property taxes. So any removal of permissive tax exemptions from these existing properties could reduce the amount of non-market housing provided or put it at risk. So this translates nicely into Kasha's next section, which is going to talk about our non-market housing needs in Nanaimo and our targets.
So there's 3 considerations to consider when granting tax exemptions for non-market housing. And the first one is our projected need for non-market housing in Nanaimo. So based on the 2023 Housing Needs Report, an average of 46% of new homes built each year need to be at not-market rates. In addition, the province has begun setting housing targets for select municipalities. It is anticipated the targets may be issued for Nanaimo in the future, and staff anticipate the provincial targets for non-market housing could be high, potentially placing major financial burdens on the existing tax base if a blanket exemption is provided for all non-market housing.
So the shift of cost to existing residential taxpayers. If the city does decide to provide permissive tax exemptions for all non-market housing units, there could be a significant shift of costs over to existing residential taxpayers. While the reasons for providing exemptions to non-market housing, they sound ideal, it could transfer significant costs, and so what we don't want to see is a cycle like what's on the screen. This diagram illustrates the cost of exemptions being shifted to existing residential taxpayers, which could potentially put them in a scenario where they have a decreased ability to be able to pay property taxes, and this is particularly for people that are on fixed incomes. If existing property owners get to a place where they aren't able to pay their property taxes, these residents could potentially become individuals that also require non-market housing, which in turn would shift more costs over onto the other remaining taxpayers. So this could create a cycle that is eventually unsustainable and doesn't recognize that every property built does create infrastructure needs, and therefore it does create additional infrastructure costs as well. So in addition to this, there could be other unintended consequences of shifting costs over to other existing taxpayers. One of the potential implications could be landlords increasing rents to help to cover the increased cost of the property taxes, but therefore creating more of a need for non-market housing as well. Based on the non-market housing targets that have been outlined in the Housing Needs Report, I think it's safe to say that the forecast is for as much non-market housing as possible in the city of Nanaimo. Based on our current statistics, the city of Nanaimo is seeing approximately 150 new non-market housing units being built every year. So those are our actual numbers, where our target numbers are 525 units a year. So at current levels, if we build 150 new units every year, and say the average assessed value of each unit is $400,000, we would be adding new assessment base of $60 million for non-market units. If we exempt that whole assessment base, we're exempting that whole assessment base, and we're doing that every year. So it's important to note that that assessment base is being compounded each year. It's not 60 million once, but it's 60, and then it's 120, and then it's 180. And so in another example, if we were to theoretically reach our target level of 525 units a year, same assumption, $400,000 per unit, the annual amount of assessment that we could potentially be exempting is $210 million. And of course, that is compounded every year as well. So the potential for large amounts of exemptions are the reason that staff is not recommending exemptions for the wider category of social housing, which is what will be outlined a little bit later in the policy recommendations. But right now, first, Kasia is going to go over some existing legislation and mechanisms that we do have to support non-market housing and to support social housing.
All right, so as Jamie said, the final consideration is existing mechanisms that exist for tax relief related to housing. And so based on research and discussions with BC Assessment, non-market housing generally falls under two categories, Class 1 residential and Class 3 supportive housing. The majority of housing falls under Class 1 and are subject to a full assessed value. The exception is for properties that have an agreement registered on title that restricts the use of the property and rents for a minimum of 40 years, according to BC Assessment. An example would be a housing agreement. In this circumstance, the assessed value could be reduced to reflect the restrictions on title, but not to the nominal amount as Class 3 supportive housing. Whereas Class 3 is subject to special valuation rules that reduce the assessed value to a nominal amount of $2, thus making a property tax exemption not necessary. Although, through our research, speaking with non-market housing providers and BC Assessment, we did discover that many non-market housing providers that offer on-site supports do not meet the strict criteria set by BC Assessment to be classified as Class 3.
So this is the last slide, policy recommendations. So after looking at all of the existing legislation and mechanisms for property tax relief for non-market housing, staff is recommending bringing forward a new policy that would include exemptions for the following three categories, which are on the screen. And the first one is legacy properties. As mentioned, many of these properties have been exempt for years and may not have agreements that would assist with the cost of property taxes. The exemptions would continue until the property is sold or until a change in use takes place, so maybe non-market housing is no longer being provided. And so that is consistent with municipal best practice, our current practice, and BC Assessment practice. Anytime a property is sold, the new owner is required to apply for a new permissive tax exemption, and it is evaluated under the current policy that's enacted at that time. The second category, temporary housing. In the report, I thought you probably would have noticed that on our current permissive tax exemption bylaw list, we actually have very few properties that are categorized as temporary housing. So on our list, we had 13 properties listed with 31 beds, but in the housing inventory database, there's 259 beds. So, why is there a big difference in that number? So this is because many of the properties that are currently providing temporary housing are already exempt in some way, shape, or form. So they're already exempt under maybe Class 3 supportive housing, and they're receiving that nominal $1 assessment for land and improvements. Some properties are church properties and are already kind of exempt through a separate church category in the bylaw. And in some cases, the properties are owned by the province of BC, and in that case, they actually pay us a payment in lieu of taxes for those properties if they're not categorized already as supportive housing. So that's the reason for the difference in those numbers. And in any case, the policy recommendation is to continue to support tax exemptions for temporary housing. The third category is supportive housing, and I know we've had a lot of talk about Class 3, Class 1, Class 3, Class 1. So Class 3 is separate, $1 assessment. It's not provided for in the permissive tax exemption policy because it's something that's administered through the province. There are some Class 1 properties or supportive housing properties where they're run by nonprofit organizations and they do provide significant amounts of on-site supports, but they might not necessarily meet all the criteria to become Class 3, and so that's what this category is for. So the policy recommendation that staff would bring forward is to consider tax exemptions for these properties, but as long as they meet certain criteria. And of course, the criteria would be brought forward in the policy, but it would be things like owned and operated by a nonprofit organization, that they don't have an operating agreement that already provides for the cost of property taxes, and the third one being that they don't charge market rates or rates that would be considered market rates under current provincial guidelines, things like that. Almost there, I promise. So those are the recommendations for the properties that would receive tax exemptions, and now that leaves the wider category of social housing. So while we would love to be able to provide exemptions for non-market housing, due to the significant financial costs of providing exemptions for so many properties, the policy recommendation is to not provide exemptions for social housing. However, this does not mean that there aren't any mechanisms for property tax relief or assessment reduction. As Kasia mentioned, if a social housing provider is willing to restrict the use of the property and they're willing to put a covenant on title and enter into a long-term housing agreement, BC Assessment will then examine the property for evidence of long-term financial and profit restrictions. So if there's evidence of this, BC Assessment can reduce the assessed value of the property by up to 70%. The benefit of this mechanism is that the assessment reductions are evaluated and applied by BC Assessment, who already has trained assessors that are required to apply these assessment reductions consistently across the province for these types of properties. This would take away the requirement for city staff members to have to review rent rolls each year to determine whether certain housing units or certain types of housing units would meet the changing definitions of non-market rates. So the policy recommendation is currently to not provide tax exemptions for social housing. In terms of next steps, if the Finance and Audit Committee is in agreement with the policy recommendations, the next step would be for us to bring forward a policy for approval, ideally before the June 30th permissive tax exemption deadline this year, so that we have something to evaluate current applications against. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very thorough. Councillor Kesselbrock, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just a question, a couple questions and a comment. So in terms of the category of social housing, my understanding there is quite a spectrum of what would fall under that category, and depending on particular arrangements and not, but if not the strictest, but if the definition of social housing as per the requirements set out by the provincial government, if they meet those, they can apply for the 70% reduction in their property assessment and would benefit from that change. Is that correct?
Do you want me to?
You go ahead.
Okay, sorry, through the chair to you, Councillor Gesrock. That's correct, as long as they've met the requirements and they've entered into a long-term housing agreement and there's a covenant and they've met that, I think it's minimum 40 years of housing. So any providers that are consistently providing housing on a long-term basis that do have all of the categories that you referenced, like rent geared to income, deep subsidy, those types of properties should qualify for the assessment reduction.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the other thing, just like a bit of reflection. So from our housing needs report, we need to be building 450 units of affordable housing. We roughly build in town 50 to 150 units per year. So there's quite a gap in terms of like what the need is and what we're building. Given that gap, a certain amount of incentivization, could be required. And just in terms of consistency of our policies, we have the downtown incentive program where we're providing 5 years of tax relief for 10 plus units in, quite a large area in the downtown area for market housing. It seems like a bit of a disjuncture in terms of need almost. Like, although we want housing in the downtown, we're giving tax exemption at least for 5 years for market housing. I'm curious if it's something that we should be reconsidering, is potentially make that tax exemption for non-market housing in the downtown. And I'm curious do you think a 5-year tax exemption for non-market housing would provide an incentive? And maybe this is a question to follow up to build more of. I know you mentioned that providing a tax exemption for 5 years and then having it stop is a bit of an issue. But I guess if it's under a different program, the expectation would be clear that it would stop after 5 years if we were to do that. I don't know if you have any comments on that, and probably no need to. I think it's something that council probably has to reflect on and take initiative on. But to me, it just seems like a bit of a disjuncture, a misalignment a bit in terms of priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Gessel-Brock. So it's my understanding that the Economic Development Department will be coming to council reviewing that exact policy that you're referring to, in addition to other incentives related to housing. So we are going to be looking into that matter, and we'll be coming to council with some staff recommendations in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe we did have like a GPC on the development for the downtown grant program, and that we did make a recommendation, and I think it's going to be implemented in the summer of this year. I'm not sure, maybe that is a question to staff. Are we coming back again to council with a further review of that tax incentive program? Or is it kind of already set? And if not, I think that maybe it's just something for us to think about on councils, that maybe we do want to review it in light of maybe some inconsistencies in our priorities.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Gessel-Brock is correct. We did have a GPC on this. You had a couple presentations on your downtown tax exemption program. The committee made some recommendations, and then that will be implemented into a new policy. But as with any policy, there's always the opportunity for future review and reconsideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question through you to staff. So the community charter requires us to exempt certain properties from taxes. Is that exemption determined by the province in their evaluations, property evaluations? Or do we have our own policy about how much of an exemption we're required to provide? Like you were mentioning 70% in some cases.
Oh, sorry, through the chair to you, Councillor Manny. Statutory exemptions are provided for things like churches, and those are generally 100% exemptions. But in the case of when they're looking for financial and profit restrictions, they would go into depth and looking at the rent rolls, trying to figure out how many units are at the low end of market, how many are deep subsidy, what mix they have in that particular building that really restricts their, ability to be able to charge increased rent to cover the operating costs of that building. So that's how I think the reduction normally goes in between 30% and 70%, depending on the mix that's in that building.
Okay, so I'm curious about an organization like the Salvation Army, which is a church, has community services, but also has some residents attached to it. So are those residents already exempt from the tax roll?
Through the chair to you again, Councillor Manley. To my knowledge, yes, the Salvation Army is fully exempt.
Okay, for everything they do. And so I'm just wondering about the fairness between an organization like that and a nonprofit organization that might be offering similar kind of residents. Is there an imbalance between organizations like that? Like between a religious organization that's providing some residents and just a nonprofit organization that's providing some similar supportive residents?
I think currently a lot of properties that are exempt as a church maybe haven't been evaluated, based on the fact that they're also providing housing. So we've always carried along with those statutory exemptions, but maybe not having considered that they're also providing housing in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like a comparison between Salvation Army and Samaritan Place. Island Crisis Care was a nonprofit organization. Is there kind of an imbalance between these two types of organizations that are providing a similar kind of service?
I see. And of course, a policy goal would be to be consistently treating all properties the same in accordance with the policy, but yeah.
Yeah.
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Manley, speaking with BC Assessment, the uses have to be permanent year-round. They cannot be temporary.
Right.
If they're temporary, they're considered Class 1, even though they may be providing very similar services. It's where, for example, Salvation Army provides year-round temporary housing. Then BC Assessment sees that reduced value and provides them a reduced assessed value depending on the use provided. So there is criteria that BC Assessment follows in order to ensure that there is fairness when it comes to assessing the value of the property and the use.
So we would leave it up to BC Assessment then for the assessment for Samaritan Place for the similar reason.
Correct, and most of those, we categorize them based on the temporary social and supportive housing to align with BC Assessment's criteria as well.
Okay.
To have alignment.
Thanks for that clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. Can you tell me more about the legacy properties? I'm just trying to get my head around. We currently don't issue PTEs for non-market housing, but we do have this category of legacy non-market housing that we have issued PTEs on. Is that correct?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Hemmons. Yes, that's correct. So over the years, there's been a variety of different types of housing providers that have been added to the PTE bylaw, and a large chunk of them do belong, in shelter and in supportive housing. But there is a category that would be currently classified under our current definitions as social housing, and they already exist on the PTE bylaw.
Okay, thank you. And if I could just have a number, so if we hit our target and we build 525 non-market units and this policy goes through and we have PTEs on those, we're looking at about 1.2 million being shifted to other properties. Do we have a figure on how much that would cost per property?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Hemmons, it's a really difficult assumption to make. I tried to sit down and do some math and kind of say, okay, if we're exempting $210 million of assessment every year, we have to predict what everybody's tax rates and tax increases are going to look like each year, what the average value of a single family home is going to be, how much of it is going to get built in which year, and it became so many kind of wild assumptions that we didn't feel comfortable putting forth a number.
That's fair. That's fair. Thank you. There's a sentence in here that I was curious about: the disadvantage of shifting additional property tax costs to existing residential taxpayers is that many taxpayers may be struggling themselves, which has been made evident by the number of properties that do not pay the full property taxes before the due date. Do we have a figure on that?
Ooh,
or like even an estimation to say that there's made evident by the number of properties? It sounds like that's a high amount.
So through the chair to you, Councillor Hemmons, there are some statistics that we published in our last report. It's one of the reasons why we were changing the property tax penalty, the shift from 2% to 8%, because what we are seeing is that our taxes outstanding at that July 2nd due date tend to be increasing. And so hence the reason for giving them a 2% penalty instead of 5%, trying to give people grace because they're not able to maybe pay the full balance by the due date. But absolutely, I can, subsequent to this, I could provide a summary of outstanding taxes at July 2nd and December 31st each year historically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eastermere, please.
Thank you. Through you, I think during your presentation you mentioned that there's only one municipality that has provisions for social housing. Is that, that's the District of Central Saanich?
Sorry, through the chair to you, Councillor Eastermere, it is at Saanich.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, just looking at theirs, they have a provision where new affordable housing, they're offering the exemptions for a 5-year term. The final year for applications is 2030. Can you just speak to the point that you made about, like, if we did bring in provisions that it would be hard to remove them in the future? Like, what would be the harm of, like, doing it for 5 years and seeing how much of a bump that gives us in social housing?
We certainly could consider providing exemptions on a term basis and a 5-year term. I know there's been a lot of municipalities previously that have granted permissive tax exemptions, and then maybe later on there's councils in the future that have maybe thought that maybe they might not want to provide exemptions anymore, and they've tried to roll it back, and it can be a really difficult thing to do. If we are going to do a term, having a term and setting an absolute end date to it, would be better than granting them into perpetuity and then changing the policy afterwards.
Okay, appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I would be very much in favor of trying it for a 5-year term or something like that, just because of the conditions we're looking at with the building world and how it's getting more expensive to build, and this is a real big gap that our own housing needs report has identified. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, and if I may, before I go to Councillor Gesselbrock, I believe this was in Mayor Alto's presentation to the Mayor's Luncheon at the AVICC on Friday. And please don't quote me, but Saanich, Central Saanich, basically all the municipalities surrounding the city of Victoria have very little social housing. The vast bulk is in the city of Victoria. And so for them to grant an exemption, with great respect, is probably a pretty small number when it actually comes to numbers in comparison to what we have already in our community. It's hundreds and hundreds of units in the city of Victoria proper, and I think it's a couple hundred outside in all the adjacent municipalities. So that's something to consider as we look at that if they're embarking on a 5-year exemption, it's because, as I say, they can potentially well afford to, because with great respect, Mayor Alto was quite blunt about Victoria taking the bulk of the burden and the other municipalities not. So I throw that out there for consideration. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think I would be interested in looking at a 5-year exemption. I'm just looking at like the gap. I mean, when you look at the Health and Housing Task Force and what terms is needed to meet that gap. Like if the report says 450 units per year and we're only building 50 to 150, that's like an annual gap of 300 units, which is quite substantial. And I just, again, we are already giving a 5-year tax exemption to any multifamily building above 10 units within quite a broad radius in the downtown. And so I do think that if we were going to align our priorities, it would be good for us to review an option for a 5-year program for permissive tax, or for a tax exemption for affordable housing, and potentially what we could do, because I know the recommendation for the development service for the downtown program, the initial staff recommendation was to have a smaller radius, and this council decided to expand the radius larger for that tax exemption. Potentially, we collapse the one for the market housing again to the smaller radius, and we do a downtown affordable housing unit at the larger radius for affordable housing projects. So it could not be not cost neutral, but we could save money by reducing the for-profit radius, and then add a little bit more money to the pot by expanding the affordable housing radius to what it is currently for the non-market. I don't know if that's 100% clear, but I think that could be a reasonable way to go about it. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, if I could, through the chair to you, Councillor Gesselbrock. The one thing to consider about our revitalization exemption programs is that with a revitalization tax exemption, it just exempts the municipal portion. So we still collect the school and the hospital portions and remit them as we do. When we issue permissive tax exemptions through bylaw, it exempts the whole entire value of the property. So it exempts everything. So there's school, everything. So all of those costs shift over, where in a revitalization program, only the municipal portion does. Does that make sense? Okay. Just something for consideration.
Councillor Prino, then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a comment, what Councillor Gesselbrock was talking about is an interesting statement. The part that I struggle with is, how many years have we had the 5-year tax exemption on the downtown area? How many years have we had that? Has that been?
Oh gosh, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
So I guess my point is, you know, if we've had it, so it's been up to 10 years, you would think that that would have been an ample opportunity to build more non-market housing, and in fact, we didn't. You know, we haven't been building to the capacity that we had hoped to, or certainly where the need is, and yet we've had this tax exemption available all that period of time. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily, you know, if we were to put it in now, I'm not entirely sure that it would work, given that it has not been working up until now to build the number of affordable homes that we do require. What I'm wondering is, can we put non-market housing in market housing buildings, for example, and offer a reduced tax, you know, exemption? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Perino, that's currently the model that BC Housing is using for their projects, and that's the model that most jurisdictions are now taking on, and BC Assessment has a specific branch that looks at that mix. So the market component is assessed at full value, and then depending if it's below market, deep subsidy, there's lots of many different terms.
Yes.
Each have their own assessed value as well. And I will add that, you know, with all of the housing bills that are currently coming down, and the newest one that is waiting royal assent, Bill 16, the province is bringing forward inclusionary zoning.
Okay.
And so that's where non-market housing is mandated as part of a development, not a density option or bonus. So there are tools that are coming that staff will be reviewing to also help increase the amount of non-market housing that could be built in Nanaimo. Prefacing also that we do have to look at our market and determining what is feasible, and the province is leaving that to us, so that's still a question mark, but there are tools coming to also help incentivize the construction of non-market housing.
So do we have a number of non-market houses, non-market housing within market housing buildings?
No, not at this moment.
Okay, good, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe, please.
Thanks, Your Worship, very much. I want to start by complimenting staff on this report. I thought it was very well written and presented and very clear, and I appreciate your candor in outlining the pros and cons of this road that I personally am very hesitant to go down any further or much further. As former chair of the Grants Advisory Committee, I know the difficulty of determining fairness when looking at criteria for tax exemptions, and I know that staff work very hard to make that criteria clear so it can be applied fairly. There are so many variables when we start to look at aspects of social housing, as Councillor Perino just mentioned, that I have real concerns about being able to be fair in applying criteria, and very real concerns about the shift of the cost onto the other taxpayers in the city, as I think you quite rightly pointed out. As to Councillor Geselbrock's suggestion, I'd be very happy to have a future GPC where we have that discussion and look at options there regarding some type of possible 5-year exemption. With respect, I think that's a separate discussion. Maybe I'm wrong there, but for what we have in front of us regarding our tax exemption policy, I think what you're recommending is reasonable, and I'm willing to support it if it comes to a motion. But I would not be in favor at this point of going any further, as I said, down the road of getting into exemptions for social housing. It's to me a can of worms, which I think would be very hard to apply fairly. And I also think that the route of BC Assessment and the provincial government, that's their role to play in that area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Emmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the recommended motion.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. Do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I'll just say, great report. I think I might find myself on the opposite side to Councillor Thorpe on this and feel if we're looking at the categories that we provide PTEs to, and I'm going to channel Councillor Armstrong in this, we're providing PTEs to organizations that primarily get government funding, but social housing is actually targeted at those who are actually just falling into poverty, which is a tension that we often, you know, are we supporting, if we have limited means, where do we want to focus our support? And I think Councillor Armstrong would argue we're focusing again our support on those who are very hardest to house, and that should be the responsibility of the provincial government. But when we talk about providing housing for everyone in our community, the city could have a really big impact by providing PTs to social housing. So I support this, but I do just want to frame that up. And I agree, we really are talking about moving money around. We're not going to reduce how much we collect. We're just going to ask those who own properties to collect a little bit more. And if I were speaking to, I think, my neighbors or just random Nanaimoites, there might be more appetite for providing PTEs to supportive housing than social housing, thank you, than supportive or temporary housing. So those are just my comments, but I'm happy to support, really appreciate the report and look forward to future conversations.
Thank you. In order, Councillors Gesselbrock and then Prino.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to support this policy, but I would like to follow up with a motion to bring options for some form of a 5-year tax exemption program for affordable housing in the downtown, with a review of the current pending downtown revitalization tax exemption policy. So having them both come to a GPC with options of integrating or, you know, just doing the affordable one instead, to a governance and priorities committee for discussion. So I can support this, and I'm working on the wording to a motion to follow up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Prino.
I just want to say, through your worship to Ms. Slater, thank you so much for going through the categories, because I find it's hard to grasp everyone, so you made it really easy to have a good idea. I wanted to be very clear, Your Worship, that the actual motion that we're voting on is that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that Council direct staff to bring forward a new permissive tax exemption policy that includes criteria for non-market housing as outlined in the staff report, and a separate other grants policy for the city's other grant programs. I guess I was a bit thrown by Councillor Hammond's comments, completely valid comments, but I just want to make sure that we're just getting this, and then as Councillor Gesselbrock, we could look at a possible other motion for another day. Okay, thank you.
That's the motion.
Okay.
No further discussion. All those in favor and any opposed, none. Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock, at some future date or to? I got it lined up
right now. So I'm going to have a crack at it. Provide some parameters, but I'd like to move that staff return to the Governance and Priorities Committee with options for a 5-year tax exemption program for affordable housing in the downtown and a review of the downtown revitalization tax exemption program, period.
And is there a seconder? Councillor Eastmere, do you want to speak to it a bit? Mr. Lindsay?
Your Worship, just maybe just some clarity or commentary to think of. So right now you have a tax exemption program in the downtown, which is for all development, not just residential, but it does include, today, it would include affordable housing. So if the motion is review options for having it in the downtown, we already do have it. If what you're asking for is more, I'm not clear why it would just be the downtown. If it's something council's interested in, is this a tax exemption program you'd be looking at citywide to encourage affordable housing, or you specifically want downtown? I just want to make sure we come back with what council.
No, and these are all kind of variables I was trying to juggle in my head. I guess I'm not, I was going to put downtown and other primary urban nodes. I guess why I put in the downtown revitalization tax exemption, because I'm just looking at the cost to the city to have a tax exemption program as a whole. And if, for example, we decrease sort of like the circumference of like the area of the downtown for profit or like for market valued housing, and increased, and then, for example, then had a affordable housing tax exemption program, say in the downtown and other prime areas, would that balance sort of the amount that the taxpayers are subsidizing as a total? So you'd take a little bit away from just the market downtown program, but add an increase for the affordable housing, maybe across citywide. So that is what I'm going at. So maybe I will, has it been seconded, my motion?
It has been, and I was going to raise the same point that our CAO has raised. And no disrespect, but this is a reason why motions with respect on the fly aren't necessarily the best motions. There is a lot more to this, and asking for a report which is going to increase staff time when, frankly, none of us have had a chance to consider or think this entirely through. I'm going to politely suggest you withdraw the motion, consider this, and then you can bring it back at some other time, giving a notice of motion in the appropriate way after you've had a chance to discuss this potentially with staff and other councillors in the CO as well, rather than get us down a path with a motion that may not produce the results that are being considered. I frankly don't think the downtown community would appreciate the concept that they may potentially face more housing without having some form of input, and I appreciate it's just a report, but it's a suggestion. I will leave my comments at that. Mr. Lindsay?
Nothing further to add, Your Worship. I do have some alternate wording that you may want to consider. Leave it to council how you want to proceed.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thanks, Your Worship, and I agree with your thoughts, and I'm very rarely a supporter of motions on the fly, and I think we're struggling now with wording on this. And in terms of process, I'd just like to point out that at the start of each GPC meeting, there is an opportunity for councillors to bring forward topics that they'd like to see discussed, and I think that might be a more appropriate avenue to go for this. And happy to have the discussion, but I think I'd like to see it done through that route. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eastmere?
Thank you. I feel like this is an appropriate motion, given that staff let us know that there is coming to a future GPC a reconsideration or further information on the downtown revitalization tax waiving. I believe, am I incorrect in that, or you did say that was going to be coming back to us?
Sorry, I missed the question.
So there was an insinuation that we would be getting at a future GPC a further staff report on the downtown revitalization tax exemptions.
Sorry, Your Worship, if there was miscommunication on that. We've had our GPC on that. The review's been done. So staff are bringing forward the amended policy as per directed.
Okay. Yeah, so given that that amended policy is coming forward, I feel like this motion is part of that, and like wanting to take them into consideration at the same time before we adopt those changes, if there are in fact amendments that we want to make based on the further knowledge that we gained here today.
Councillor Gesselbrock, and then Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor. I like to get on stuff and get it moving. I definitely take the points of the mayor. I don't think that it's going to cause a huge delay for me to have a chat with Mr. Lindsay and dial in the motion a little bit more and bring it back at another council meeting. I don't want to go through the full process of a GPC and then wait 4 months and blah 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 do it. But I'm happy to have a chat, get a proper motion, and put something forward either as a notice of motion or through another mechanism. So thank you. I'm happy to withdraw the motion and get it done a little bit more dialed in. Thank you.
Do we have the consent of the seconder?
Okay. So cannot consent of the seconder. I would ask for the alternate wording from Mr. Lindsay, if that's possible, of the motion so that we could consider it.
Yes, let's let Councillor Manley in. He hasn't had a chance yet.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think if we're going to be doing an exemption for affordable housing, we should do it right across the city. Because honestly, like we already have challenges with all kinds of services in our downtown core, and I like to see affordable housing in the different secondary cores as well. I mean, we have people that work and live and play in those areas, and that need access to affordable housing. And so, if we were going to do it, I think we should be doing it citywide and maybe focusing on secondary urban cores.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Great. I think I heard loud and clear in that, and I think that's totally reasonable. So given that feedback about seeing it across the entire city, Mr. Lindsay, did you have some maybe potential alternative wording that would...
Well, you're going to have to move an amendment to the motion that's on the floor. If that's the case, if it's not going to be withdrawn in its entirety and represented at a later date.
Correct. It's on the... Just a thing. It's on the floor right now. There's a question asked to our staff. They'll provide us with information. Potentially that could lead to an amendment.
Ms. Robertson.
Just as an option to consider, because these motions need to go forward to Monday's meeting, so they will be on the agenda. Because that topic will be on there, that would give staff enough time to look and work with Councillor Gesselbrock on a notice of motion which could be added to that agenda on Monday. And then that way there would be time for wording. And unless there's still a desire to pursue wordsmithing on the fly.
That sounds like a reasonable option. I'm curious if my seconder agrees. Okay.
I'm amenable to that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we'll withdraw the motion and then bring something back for the council meeting. Thank you.
We're agreeing with withdrawing the motion. Thank you very much. All right, we do have the motion on the floor. All those in favor? We're voting on the motion that's been the start of this, the recommended motion that's been the start of this conversation.
Did we?
No. Yes, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right. Just ignore me. Just ignore me, just ignore me. F, give where you live grant application update Harry Whipper Park. Ms. Davis, you're standing in for Mr. Harding this morning? No? Good morning.
Morning, Your Worship. Good morning, Council. I'm standing for Mr. Harding. He's not able to be present this morning. So what you have in front of you is the information report for the Give Where You Live grant application for the Harry Whipper Park. So this report is to advise Finance and Audit Committee. The city has submitted a grant application to the Nanaimo Foundation's Give Where You Live Fund for the Rocky Point Neighborhood Association's Partner in Parks project at the Harry Whipper Park. So this grant, if we're successful, will provide funding for extra amenities that were not identified in the Partners in Park project. So that we're hoping we can get and put to use.
Thank you very much, Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to put the motion on the floor. If I get a seconder to speak to it, please.
Seconded, Councillor Himmons. Motion's on the floor.
I just wanted to say that I've seen some of the work that this particular group has been doing, and it's tough to fundraise. And it's a very busy park for, families to come, and there's no playground for the other members of the family while they're waiting for their teams to play. And so I think this is an important project for us to support. They've done a lot of work. And
actually, in fairness, Councillor Himmons has pointed out there is no motion. It's just a report. So I think we're all in.
Missed that part.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thanks, Your Worship. I do have a question. Thank you. Through you to staff. Thank you. So I'm well familiar with the Partners in Park program and the funding that the city provides for those projects, but I don't ever recall in the past tying this into the Nanaimo Foundation opportunity, Give Where You Live. This is something new? Is this something that we will be exploring in future for other projects, or why is this possibly just a one-off?
Through the chair to Councillor Thorpe, this was the first time it's been done, and it was actually pursued by the group, who have done an incredible job, as you said, about fundraising and have achieved their goal of fundraising $80,000. And through their tenacity, they identified this additional opportunity for additional amenities for those above and beyond, which were already funded through the PIP. The play equipment has already been ordered, and the project is due to begin this fall. So this is for things like a water fountain and bike racks. And for sure, we could, as the City of Nanaimo, look again at the Nanaimo Foundation grant if we were to have other projects that fell within its remit in the future.
So this is the initiative of the organizing group, and I say good for them.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Well done. Councillor Hemmons, then back to Councillor Perino.
Thank you. Following on Councillor Thorpe, can you please remind me, the Partners in Parks, so we provide $50,000 in funding, and do they have to match it? I'm kind of blown away by this amount that they've raised. And is that average for a group that participates in this program?
Through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, they don't have to match it. So our parks planner works with the group and comes up with a plan for the playground or the amenity that we're doing through PIP. It could be really any community type project. It tends to be playgrounds historically. And then we devise the plan, and they can come to us with fundraising or in-kind donations as well. Maybe they have connections within the community who can provide donations, and some of that has been done here. And one of the things we've noticed since the price increase is that these projects are getting harder and harder to achieve for our community groups. Things are taking longer. However, these guys have kind of blown everything out of the water and done a really, really good job. And I think they've had a great group who've been heavily committed and probably very well connected as well within the community in order to make this happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perino.
I'm embarrassed for my error, but I'll tell you what I was reading was
I'm the chair and I let it in. What are
you did. You're right. You did. All right. I'll blame you. On the financial considerations, the 24 to the 28 financial plan will be amended to increase the budget for the project from 130 to 145. That's what I thought we were voting on, because I know what this group has been through and how they've come to other organizations like Rotary and so forth. So I was so excited to see that they're there and that we could take them. So are we waiting then just for the grant application to be successful through the Nanaimo Foundation? I mean, what's happening from here?
Through the chair to Councillor Perino, the grant application has been submitted, and we expect to find out sometime late spring, early summer.
Okay.
The project is able to proceed with or without finding out.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. Ms. Robertson, for technical purposes, we withdraw the motion?
My apologies, I was sending a note to staff.
Seeing as how I allowed a motion, it was moved and seconded. I assume the mover and seconder will withdraw that motion. Thank you very much for the record. That makes it easier. Are we clear, Ms. Monagle? Very good. The next is, much appreciated, the next is Marie Davidson BMX Park redevelopment. This does have a motion, but we'll hear the report first.
Good morning again, Your Worship and Council. This is a report for decision, and it's concerning the Marie Davidson BMX Park redevelopment. This park is shovel-ready, ready to go. There's some challenges with getting some of the financing in place to finalize it, so the recommendation is that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend Council increase the 2024 budget for the Marie Davidson BMX Park by $330,000. From $1,507,827 to $1,837,827. The fund the increase from the Growing Communities Fund Reserve. I'm going to turn the report itself over to Ms. Davis, and she can answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmons.
I'll move the recommended motion.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, I think that's an easy one. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you so much. The last item is the 2024-2028 financial plan update. Ms. Mercer and then Ms. Fulla, please.
Thank you. So all of the information has been compiled and entered into the system. So we are here today to present the 2024 to 2028 final financial plan. We have one item for consideration, and Ms. Full is going to walk you through where we're at currently, how we got there from where we were when we last talked to you in the fall or in the winter, and we'll have a decision for you to make. So I'll hand it over to Ms. Full.
Good morning. So today we'd like to update Council on the 2024 to 2028 financial plan. The presentation today will reflect changes made since the adoption of the provisional budget in January. So changes include updates to estimates, as well as new information we've received and Council directives. At the time the presentation was prepared, the projected property tax increase for 2024 was 8.4%. Based on direction we've received from Council to increase the IT base budget, we are now at 8.5% for 2024. Of the 2024 increase, approximately 0.7% relates to projects. This breaks down to 0.3% for the increase to the base project funding and 0.4% for additional funding approved by Council for specific projects. You will also notice that we are using reserves to lower property taxes. In 2021 and 2022, reserves were used to help lower taxes as the economy, tongue-tied today, recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic. Reserve funding was budgeted to end in 2025. You will recall last year when we presented the final budget, Council did make the decision to remove the reserve funding for 2023 only. So we did not use any reserves in 2023, and then we have them in for 24 and then 25. Back in December, you adopted your user rate bylaws. So we have a 4% sewer increase. This is 2% for asset management and a 2% general increase. We had a 6% water increase. This is 2% for our asset management and 4% general increase. And sanitation user fees went up 3.2%. This chart here shows you the recap of our recent property tax increases. So between 2014 and 2023, our 10-year average was 3.3%, and our 5-year average, so 2019 to 2023, was 5.1%. So what does 8.4% mean for the typical house in Nanaimo? Well, Class 1 properties dropped an average of 2.8%. So an average home whose value changed the same as the Class 1 category will see approximately a $222 increase to their taxes. Now, please note this does exclude collection by the city for other governments. So these are just the municipal portion of their taxes. The $2,861 in property taxes that the typical home will pay breaks down as follows. $2,339 funds day-to-day operations. This is for maintaining our parks and sports fields, our recreation and culture facilities, public safety such as police, fire, and our community safety officers, as well as the maintenance of the roads and storm sewer infrastructure. $43 will go to debt servicing, so that includes the debt on the Port of Nanaimo Centre where we're sitting today, Fire Station number 4, as well as planned short-term borrowing for property purchases in 2024. $295 will go to reserves. This includes our annual contribution to the General Asset Management Reserve, equipment depreciation, IT and photocopier reserve contributions, as well as a contribution to the Climate Action Reserve and our 2 artificial turf field reserves at Q Field and the Harwood artificial turf fields. And $184 will go to projects. So this includes base funding of $8.4 million, as well as additional funding you approved in the amount of $1.2 million. And that $1.2 million was for the Bevan Park pickleball courts, as well last year you approved additional funding for fire station renos to support the 40 new firefighters. We have 20 of those that started last August, and January 1st we'll have another 20 new firefighters. So based on the new org structure, this shows how the $2,339 for city services breaks down by area. For presentation purposes, we have broken community services into PRC and what we're calling community safety. So the $1,168 for community safety consists of $607 for the RCMP, $373 for Nanaimo Fire Rescue, which includes the provision of 911 services, and $188 covers bylaw, community safety officers, social planning, as well as police services. And by police services, I mean the municipal portion. In corporate services at $265, that includes finance, IT, and corporate and business development. Corporate and business development encompasses real estate, economic development, the operation of the Vancouver Island Conference Centre, tourism, as well as the Nanaimo Prosperity Corporation. Also, under corporate services, we keep some general government expenses, such as grants and aid, corporate insurance, and this is also where committed contingency sits. So as you know, we do have an expired contract with the IAFF, and we're working on getting a new contract there. So we have budgeted in committed contingency because there will be some sort of retro payment and settlement associated with a new contract. And when looking at engineering and public works at $270, please keep in mind this doesn't include sewer, water, and most sanitation costs as they are funded by user fees, and this graph here is breaking out how property taxes are spent. So when you break this all down, you're paying approximately $6, oh, I have the wrong slide up there. Sorry, $6.41 a day for the city services you receive. On the revenue side, the total revenue for the city is budgeted at $267.8 million. This will provide funding for operations, projects, reserves, as well as the Vancouver Island Regional Library. Please note, revenue does exclude new borrowing as well as transfers from reserves, as these are considered funding sources, not revenue sources. As you can see from the chart, property taxes make up about 58.2% of the city's revenue, so they are the largest share of our revenue. On the operations side, $200.6 million will be spent for annual operations. This does not include projects, so it doesn't include operating projects or capital projects, and it doesn't include the Vancouver Island Regional Library. This is strictly day-to-day operations. On this chart, we've broken out the RCMP from community safety, because you can see the RCMP is a big portion of our budget, as well community safety makes up a big portion. And we have also broken out the Port of Nanaimo Centre from corporate services, and of course on this chart, sewer and water are shown separately, but they are part of engineering and public works. So just want to make sure the clarity of the difference between this chart and the other chart is this one is their operating budget. It doesn't take into account how those services are funded, whereas the other chart was talking about how much specifically for property taxes of the typical home supported each service. So how did we get from 8% that we were at with the provisional budget to the 8.4% we're at now? And this doesn't account for the recent decision that brought us to 8.5. So we had a $76,000 increase for 911 services. So additional funding was required for our contract for fire dispatch. This adjustment reflects a higher than anticipated inflationary adjustment as well as increasing call volumes. The budget for the RCMP contract was reduced. So as you know, we have a budget for 3 new members starting April 1st. Unfortunately, all 3 members were not here for April 1st, so we have adjusted the contract budget to reflect the delayed start date. As part of the reorganization, we did have some positions move around, and we did add $25,000 in management consulting. When we were back here in the fall, we did indicate that wages and benefits did not include benefit changes yet in the provisional budget. So we didn't have all the updated rates. We now have updated rates for pensions, CPP, EI, WorkSafe, and extended health. So that's all been incorporated in the budget for final, as well as we had some other adjustments between positions and hours. So that is reflected in the $220,000 increase you see. Other. So when we do budget drivers, we always disclose to you budget drivers that are more than 6 figures, and then we have the other category. So that's all those other little changes that happen to the budget. We compile them all into one line. So we have had some changes that hit that other line. It includes things like adjustment to interest on tax accounts, some changes to space rental. We now know the final amount we're going to receive from the RDN for the rec sharing services agreement. As well, we've done things like update estimates for casino revenue, just to name us some of those few smaller changes that totaled $17,000.
Councillor Gusbrock has a question.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just with the investment income, what we projected, we actually got a little bit less from our investments.
So for draft and provisional budget, we were estimating we were going to be more about 7.5 million for revenue for investment income. Based on current markets and looking out at what the market is supposed to do for the remainder of the year, we've dropped investment income projections to 6.9 million, which is very close to what we made in 2023. In 2023, we made 6.87 million. So our projection is quite in line with what we earned in returns.
Okay, perfect. Just from the provisional budget to like now, that's what we're seeing as
yes, yeah. So it's an increase over what the budget was in 2023, because in 2023 our investment income exceeded our budget projection, but we've dialed it back a little bit just to be conservative based on what's going on in the market, so that we're not short on revenue.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship, and a question through you to Ms. Feller. I'm just wondering, the RCMP, did we go 95%? Was it 95% that we, is that?
Correct. We have budgeted for 95% of our share of the contract.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And then the last change we had is growth. So for both draft and provisional budget, we take a conservative approach to growth. We budgeted it at $1.2 million. We now have our final growth number, and it came in at 1.474, which is down slightly from our 5-year average. So our 2019 to 2023 average was 1.53 million. So when we compile all these changes, it had a net impact of a $512,000 increase, or a 0.4% increase to the budget, which takes us from the 8% we were at in January to 8.4%. Now, we also had a number of other changes to the budget that don't impact property taxes. For example, we had project changes. We had directives from council. As well, we have adjusted the timing of some projects. For example, we have accelerated some shelving required at the police operations building, and we've moved out a sewer DCC project due to permitting delays. We've also been advised of some successful grant applications, which we've incorporated into the budget. And before we come back on April 29th, we'll be adding the second phase to the Meredith water main project. So if council will recall, we did have a couple breaks last fall on Meredith. For the provisional budget, we had phase 1 incorporated into the project plan. Staff has now been able to work into their work plan to do phase 2 so that they can do phase 1 and phase 2 at the same time. So we will be adding that into the budget when we bring it back to you on the 29th for first 3 readings. Other changes we made is the Fortis operating agreement. We have upped the estimate for revenue by $70,000. And as you recall, that revenue goes into your strategic infrastructure reserve to fund initiatives and projects of council. In the sewer fund, we made a few changes. We increased our user fee projection by $140,000 based on 2023 results. We adjusted debt servicing on internal borrowing. So as I just mentioned, we did push the sewer DCC project out a year, and that was actually going to be funded from internal borrowing. So of course now we don't need to borrow the money in 2024, so the debt servicing has been reduced in 2024 and changed in 2025 to reflect that change. And of course, we have staff that work in the sewer fund, so those benefit changes also impacted the sewer fund. On the water side, we increased revenue projections by $300,000 based on 2023 results. However, this has been partially offset by we had to increase the chemical budget at the water treatment plant by $135,000, and we also have borrowing for the water treatment plant. So we have 2 borrowings on the water treatment plant. One came up for renewal, and unfortunately the interest rate went up and the actuarial rate went down, so our debt servicing costs increased $56,000 for 2024. And then, of course, we also have staff in the water fund, so we had benefit changes there. Now, we also have a few other changes that aren't in the budget that was before you today, but we will be incorporating before we come back on the 29th. We found out at the end of March that we are getting 3 years of funding upfront for the LGCAP program. So that's the Local Government Climate Action Program. And that funding goes straight to your Climate Action Reserve Fund to fund projects and initiatives. So we'll be adding that funding in for final. As well, we were also advised of a few other small grants that we received, so we'll be incorporating that. And of course, at the RDN, they agreed to co-host the AVI-CC with the city, so we'll be adding their funding contribution into the budget as well. Now, we do have one decision point for council to consider. Currently, the RCMP contract is budgeted at 95% for all 5 years. So we have 3 options available for council. One would be to reduce for 2024 only the percentage to 93%. The second option would be to reduce it to 92% for 2024 only, or option 3 is status quo. Now, I should mention the RCMP members contract did expire last March, so March 31st, 2023, their contract did expire and they are in negotiations. At the end of the year, we did receive direction from E-Division on how much to accrue for potential retro related to 2023. So we do have money set aside for that. That likely will be a little less than is actually needed to address the retro that we anticipate paying out. However, you also need to keep in mind we have the RCMP contract reserve. So it currently has a projected closing balance of $4.2 million with a minimum balance requirement of $2.7 million. So if needed, we could draw from that reserve for any additional retro that we're required to pay. And that also provides a bit of a cushion if, say, council chooses to reduce how much we budget for the contract and our actual expenses come in higher. If there wasn't surplus available to fund that, we could draw down from the reserve.
Thank you very much. In order, Councillors Eastmere and Gesselbrock.
I would like to put option 2 on the table for consideration, funding at 92%.
Do you wish to speak to it?
I believe I spoke to this the last time I tried to move this, but it looks even more important now given where we're at with the new items in the budget. And I think that, you know, this is only for 2024 and would have a big impact. And as we're hearing, we have adequate reserves for contract negotiations, et cetera.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Did somebody second that?
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. That's my question just on the reserve. So my recollection of the discussion when we had this a few months ago was that having the contract at 95%, what's not used goes into the RCMP contract reserve, which you said has got about 2-point-something million in it.
Through the chair.
4 million.
Yes, it has a projected closing balance of $4.2 million. And last year, when we allocated surplus, any surplus that came from what we had budgeted for the RCMP contract, we did put to the RCMP contract reserve. And that's generally staff's recommendation to council since we budgeted that money for RCMP to set it aside for RCMP. So we do, and it has a minimum balance requirement of $2.7 million. And I should make sure that I do advise you that that minimum balance changes each year because it is based on the portion of the budget that we don't budget for, so that 5%, that's what it's based on. And of course, as the RCMP contract goes up every year, it does increase our minimum balance requirement.
Okay, so that leaves like right now in that thing that we could use for the RCMP contract renegotiation bump up, whatever that's going to be, like 1.7 million. You said that there's another reserve that has that we've been putting the money away for in anticipation for this additional cost that's going to come, and I'm curious how much money is in that.
Okay, through the chair to Council Gastebrek. So at the end of the year, we accrued $510,000, about $500,000. I am so tongue-tied today. My apologies. About $500,000 is sitting in a liability account. It's not sitting in a reserve, but similar type thing. It's in a liability account for retro that we'll owe. But we do, based on information we received, we know that's going to be low.
Right. So I guess we have about 2.5, somewhere around in that area of money that we could use from the reserves to pay for this extra bump up. What was the number that they said that roughly would be? Like, is it going to be much more than that, or are our current reserves totally going to cover it? Because I guess my feeling is like, if it's not, we might as well take it on the nose today, you know, here, and just to save up more for it. So I'm just curious, like, what's the ballpark number that it's going to cost?
Okay, through the chair to Council Gastebrek. So we have some information on a proposed settlement. They haven't detailed, like they haven't given us, here's how much City of Nanaimo is going to cost you. So based on some estimates we've made, I do know that what we have sitting in our liability account will not be enough. But when I look at what we have sitting there and what we have sitting in reserves, I think we feel fairly comfortable that we have enough funding to cover off the retro we'll owe for 2023, as well as cover the shortfall in the budget in 2024. Because of course the budget estimate we received from E-Division that we based our budget on doesn't reflect the proposed agreement that is currently in front of all the parties for approval. So there would be a bit of a shortfall there. So assuming we didn't suddenly get all 164 officers, we should be good. But that's the unknown part, and the risk management part here is depending on how many officers we actually end up with, what percentage of the contract we'll actually have to pay this year. So I do think there is room to move from the 95%, and that we might have to dip into that reserve, but that the reserve would cover that shortfall. The question is how much risk you want to take on and how much you do want to reduce it, if you're more comfortable with the 93% or the 92%.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Prino.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a question to Ms. Fullen. I think you've done great. Tongue-tied or not, you're doing great.
My apologies.
So when we're looking at an 8.5 tax increase, should we go with this motion and should it pass at the 92% for the RCMP contract, what will that bring the percentage from 8.5 down to?
7.6.
Is it 7.6? I just wanted to confirm it.
Through the chair to Councillor Perino, we'd be at approximately 7.7%, and we would be at about 7.2 in 2025, because of course then we go back up to 95 in 2024. But then of course, depending on our vacancy rates in 2025, that could be a decision point again for council next fall to decide at what level you feel comfortable budgeting that contract.
I just want to say thank you to Councillor Eastmore for bringing this to the table. Again, I appreciate that. Anything we can do, given the high cost of what, the RDN and the hospital and school and library and everything else, but the cost of just feeding families today is so high. Anything we can do to reduce the taxes is important. I will be voting in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any further discussion. All those in favor and opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Fulham, Ms. Mercer, thank you very much.
I have one more slide for you.
Sorry?
So just so you understand next steps, we'll be back on April 29th with the financial plan amendment bylaw as well as the property tax bylaw for first 3 readings. And then we are hoping council will adopt both bylaws on May 6th, because as they both do need to be adopted before the May 15th deadline.
Thank you very much. Motion for adjournment. Moved Councillor Prino, seconded Councillor Manley. All those in favor, none opposed. Thank you very much, everyone. Glad we got this through in the morning.